Hello, everyone. Welcome to another mini lecture for 2090 summer session. So we're going to talk about how editing works in film. Now, we could talk a lot more in depth if it weren't a summer session. So we're going to go over just a few concepts with editing and how you kind of create narratives through editing, because obviously that's kind of concerned with our class since we're literature and film. Now, continuity, you've probably heard of this. This is a storytelling element as well as obviously with film and editing kind of element. How do we take all the shots, sequences, all that, put them together? Most films are not shot in logical sequence, linear sequence. It's all what you could shoot the day of and so forth. So what we have is continuity editing, and it's a system that uses cuts and other transitions to establish that idea of verisimilitude, right? The truth seeming and convey narratives effectively. So the whole point of editing is to minimize the mental effort on us as viewers, as audience. So the two main styles that we'll look at today are invisible editing, where the overall movie, scene, sequences, so forth, contain very few breaks between shots or usually for slower pacing. And then visible editing, overall movie scenes and sequences contain rapid cuts and breaks and so forth. Each genre uses them, that's the thing. There's no, like, if you're going to make a horror movie, there are times where you want visible and there are times where you want invisible. If you're going to make a drama, a comedy, there are times that you're going to be using invisible and invisible. There's a lot of good mix. Nowadays, of course, most movies are really bombarded with visible editing. So I'll just take a couple of scenes from Faust and Peter Restraw. So regardless of whether you saw these movies, you'll see the kind of editing techniques in place. So this sequence, when we have Dr. Faustus monologuing, while we have these kind of Vaseline type, we don't. It's not a cut, but it's just to help the scene along. But notice how there's no cuts, right? We're just having the monologue, the thoughts, and there are absolutely no cut at all. Which creates obviously very boring kind of elements sometimes for modern audiences. We do have, again, a little bit of a cut, right? We have a cut to, close-up shot of our character. But notice, again, lingering. We've been on this for several seconds. No other cuts. Now when we jump to Petey Wheatstraw, let's take a look at just a few seconds. So we have that first establishing shot of them in the house, and then we cut back and forth. Notice in just 12 seconds, 13 seconds now, we've had several cuts, right? And now we're even going into just 25 seconds. We have a zoom in and then cuts. And so, again, for the purposes of comedy, what Rudy Ray Moore and Remorque were trying to accomplish, again, fast pace, right? Notice how we had a long amount of time, right? Going, I cut the scene down a bit, but we had several seconds of just no cuts and just one cut when we finally had one. Whereas here, in just a matter of 27 seconds, we have numerous cuts. So the purpose, obviously, is to quicken, right, the action, to again, slow the tension down. Sometimes you want a more intense feeling. Sometimes you want to build tension. So therefore, you're going to use invisible. Sometimes you want to have high energetic kind of scenes, so then you're going to use visible. There's no real better way. It's not like one is better than the other. As I said, most use both in a film. It just depends on what's happening with that scene. So another important element for continuity editing is the 180-degree rule. Now, this is the primary rule of continuity editing, whether you're doing dialogue, action, monologuing, whatever. The key issue, and anyone who's a sports fan or a video gamer will recognize how it works. When we have our characters, and we're just going to do a standard dialogue scene, or if you're going to do a video game, standard fight scene, right? We always want our characters in the same position in the frame, so we're not confusing the audience. So our character in red should always be frame right, and our character in blue should always be frame left. This is a standard way to shoot dialogue, shot, reverse shot, establishing shot, and then shot, reverse shot over the shoulder. Very typical way of doing dialogue. What we don't want to do is now, if we cross this line where now our character who was once frame right is now frame left, and our character who is once frame left is now frame right, that's going to confuse a lot of audiences. It's going to disorient us. The 180-degree rule, and if you watch sports, you know this instinctively, you just pan, left, right, and so forth. Up, down, you could do any kind of direction within this arc, this 180-degree arc. But if you cross it, we're going to get very confused. So if a runner is going toward a goal, and then all of a sudden you flip it, and then now it looks like they're running away from that same goal, it really confuses the audience. So what we do is, again, imaginary line is drawn between the objects and characters, and this is called the director's line, line of action, axis of action. It's a bunch of different frames. Usually people say director's line or line of action or eye line. As I said, the first character is always frame right, other characters are always frame left. Don't cross or rotate beyond that 180-degree zone. The zone relies on constructing a clear eye line, and especially when we do a standard, shot, reverse shot with dialogue, the eye lines match up. And it is very important for films, television shows, almost every single piece of media, even Reels and TikToks and all sorts of things, have this 180-degree rule in place because it matters for the audience to just get a sense of orientation. We would feel very confused and disoriented, even like puppy videos, right? We have to have some kind of line of action. So we keep that camera within this arc. And it's a very important way of, again, establishing our understanding as viewers of what's happening in the movie. Simple scene for Most Dangerous Game demonstrates when you have numerous characters, what do we do with that line? So I'm just going to play a quick dialogue scene where Zaroff is eye line. Now we have our drunk character. Notice he's looking left. He's frame left, even though he's kind of center of the frame, but for the purposes of the dialogue scene, he's still looking here, even when he's moving. And now we have our head tilt, so we now know that Zaroff is going to be looking this way. And once we switch, notice how all characters are looking toward the left except for Zaroff. So again, it's just a way, especially when you're dealing with people, action sequences, what have you, right? Vehicles, anything that's going to rely on heavy action. We have a line, and we make sure that the audience just understands where, just understands where everyone is. Now, I put up these videos too, so especially if you're interested in making movies, but also in terms of dissecting movies, once you start learning this rule, you won't be able to unsee it kind of thing. But again, it doesn't ruin anything in terms of film. But it's a very interesting way of building action lines and what you do with numerous characters and so forth. So again, look at those videos as well, and then you'll get a really good sense of the 180-degree rule. Now, there are other forms of editing, and again, if we had time, right, there's graphic, there's rhythmic, there's temporal, there's spatial editing, and if you're interested, there's so many good videos out there online. But again, just for the purposes of consolidation, we won't go into those heavier kind of concepts and more specific kind of concepts. But again, just be aware. There's parallel editing. There's all sorts of things, right? So editing describes the relationships between shots and the process by which they are combined. It's essential to the creation of narrative space and to the establishment of narrative time within movies in particular and TV shows and so forth. Traditionally, commercial cinema prefers the continuity system, and you'll see that difference where avant-garde films often they do break, and there are Hollywood movies that break the 180-degree rule, but they do it for specific effects. Usually in horror, you see that the most often. But it, again, is trying to create a sense of logic, right? A continuous narrative that allows us to suspend our disbelief easily and comfortably. The main technique, again, to preserve this system, as I said, is the 180-degree rule. Alternatively, filmmakers may use editing to solicit our intellectual participation or to call our attention to their work in a reflexive manner. So therefore, you will see, especially with avant-garde and independent cinema, a lot of times people playing around with editing techniques that are a-traditional, right? That don't quite fit into a continuity system. Even The Witcher was a good one where they play around with temporal editing so much that a lot of times mainstream viewers found it a little difficult to understand because time is jumping kind of, in terms of narrative speaking. But then people get into it because, again, it involves us to kind of think with the TV show. So some people enjoy it, some people don't. But again, there's a lot of ways that we could really have fun with editing. Obviously, if you have questions, always email. Again, if you need an alternative format, contact myself or the ARC Resource Center. Hope you enjoyed. You take care, and good luck with the rest of the week.